Hello friends, my name's the real Emile and welcome back to some more Forza Top Gear laps. Today we're taking a look at some rally legends. Now I've tried to pick a decent selection of rally cars, got some modern ones, got some Group B, got some 90s. Not so many 70s rally cars, although down below there is a straw poll for the single Top Gear laps episode which goes up the day after this one, and there are some 70s cars in that straw poll for you to choose from. So pick your favourite and then that car will be covered tomorrow. Anyways, on to today's episode, and we start with the Audi Quattro, 306 horsepower, 2,807 pounds of weight. With 306 horsepower, the Audi Quattro is the most powerful vehicle here today, which is quite surprising. This thing has way more horsepower than I was expecting it to. To be honest with you, I wasn't expecting much more than about 220 horsepower, but no, the Quattro has 306 from standard, which is very, very good. That means that on paper this is the quickest vehicle here today. Admittedly, it's only the most powerful by 1 horsepower. However, the second most powerful car weighs 500 pounds more than this one does, so yeah. How does Quattro drive though? Well, it drives kind of how you'd expect most road-going rally cars to. It has a kind of soft suspension layout, it has a little bit of understeer because it's 4-wheel drive and has a decent amount of power. But other than that, it is relatively decent. The rear end doesn't pop out on it at all, which is very, very nice for my sort of driving. I would prefer if the suspension wasn't as rolly, but it isn't as bad as, say, a MG Metro or the Lancia Delta S4. Overall, I found the Quattro to be a pretty decent vehicle. Definitely very, very quick in a straight line, that's for certain. Around the corners, if you harden the suspension up, I could imagine it's a decently quick race car. Next up we have a Peugeot 205 T16, 200 horsepower, 2,524 pounds of weight. Now the T16 has a lot less power than the Quattro, however that doesn't mean that it's a slouch. It is still relatively quick in a straight line. Through the corners, well, there is some issues as you're about to see through here. The 205 T16 will rotate on you if you are not careful. Yeah, if you turn it in for just a little bit too long, the rear end will end up sliding out. Admittedly, it's quite fun to drive because of that. However, it's not exactly conclusive for a good lap time. The suspension doesn't roll around nearly as much as it did in the Quattro, which is quite nice. The 205 T16 actually surprised me. It's a relatively decent handling vehicle. Again, it's one of those, it's got 200 horsepower. There is a little bit of understeer in this vehicle, but there isn't too much. Because ultimately, with only 200 horsepower and 4-wheel drive, you wouldn't really expect it to understeer all that much. So it isn't actually a bad car to drive at all. Straight line speed, relatively decent. Obviously, it's nowhere near as quick as a Quattro. However, it is not bad when it comes to straight line speed. And certainly compared to some of the other vehicles here today, it was actually quite quick. So yeah, 205 T16 genuinely surprised me. Also this thing, unfortunately I can't show you it because I have to run all these vehicles stock, but this car has an absolutely amazing body kit which I definitely suggest you go and take a look at because it's fantastic. Anyways, next up today we have a Renault 5 Turbo, 157 horsepower, 2,138 pounds of weight. This is the least powerful car here today. It is also the lightest vehicle here today by a decent enough margin. So with only 157 horsepower, the Renault 5 Turbo, it's mid-engine, it's rear drive, and it handles pretty darn fantastically. This really is probably the most surprising vehicle I drove today. It is extremely nice to drive this thing. It gets turned in pretty well. You can have some issues with understeer occasionally, i.e. if you push it through the corner a little bit too much. But to be honest with you, the Renault 5 Turbo, other than that, is pretty much perfect. The suspension is pretty rock solid, actually, which I was not expecting. Straight line speed isn't all that bad. I mean, with only 157 horsepower, obviously it's not going to set the world alight. But, I mean, out of all the vehicles here today, it's not too... I mean, it is probably the slowest in a straight line. But it isn't by much, which is very, very surprising. Of course, because it's the Renault 5 Turbo, it looks kind of silly. It's got this massive wide body kit on it, and you can add some more body mods to it, which makes it look even more insane. I will say these rally cars have some fantastic customization to them, which is really awesome. But yeah, the Renault 5 Turbo, go and drive this vehicle, because it genuinely surprised me. It is a very, very, very good driving car, this one. Sure, it doesn't have all that much power, and I can't imagine you could stick too much more power in it without getting handling issues, but it is a good car nevertheless. Anyways, next up we have the Lancia 037 Stradale, 202 horsepower, 2,540 pounds of weight. Now, this car, I've never actually driven this stock in Forza before, and, well, I've got to say, I already knew it was going to be a pretty good car because this thing, at least in the older games, was a leaderboard car, and, well, driving it today, I can totally see why. This is probably the best handling car here today. Suspension is nice and solid. It gets turned in extremely well. There's no understeer, there's no oversteer, there's no mucking about. This car just grips. It's just got lots and lots and lots of grip. It's pretty incredible the way this thing drives. 202 horsepower doesn't sound like a lot, but straight line speed is surprisingly good. It doesn't weigh all that much. It only weighs 16 more pounds than the T16. And it's probably quicker than the T16 in a straight line, to be perfectly honest with you. And just through the corners, it can obliterate the 205 T16. This thing is just incredible through the corners. Go ahead and drive this thing if you haven't already. It is amazing. Again, I was kind of expecting it to be amazing, but yeah, this really was a fantastic, fantastic car, the Lancia 037. Next up, we have our only 90s rally car today. This is the Toyota Celica GT4, 255 horsepower, 3,175 pounds of weight. This admittedly is one of the heavier vehicles here today. However, with 255 horsepower, it is one of the more middling cars when it comes to its horsepower. However, the Celica GT4 PI-wise is one of the lower vehicles today. I believe it's around where the Renault 5 Turbo is. I know it's a D-class car. Unfortunately for the Celica, while the handling is okay, there is a decent amount of understeer in this vehicle. With 255 horsepower, you kind of expect that, especially considering it's a 90s car. But it isn't too bad. In a straight line though, this car isn't all that quick. To be honest with you, it's not that much quicker than the Renault 5, and I think any other vehicle here today would probably embarrass this thing in a straight line, which is a bit unfortunate, because I really like the Celica GT4. This is my favourite generation of Toyota's Celica, and it's a really, really cool car, but it just didn't have the straight line speed, unfortunately. Through the corners, again, it was reasonably decent. There was understeer, but it was okay. It just, straight line speed really let this vehicle down. If it had 40 more horsepower and about 200 pounds less weight, it would have been a lot quicker, but as it stands, the GT4 was just simply a little bit too heavy and didn't have quite as much power. Next up today, we have a Subaru WRX STI 2011 model. This has 305 horsepower and 3,384 pounds of weight. This is the heaviest vehicle here today, and it is the second most powerful, only losing to the Audi Quattro by 1 horsepower. So, the Subaru WRX, how does this thing drive? Well, we've had several Subaru Imprezas around here before, and all of them have driven very similarly, and this one is no exception. It has some understeer, which is sort of the most prevailing thing. However, straight line speed, relatively decent. Acceleration is pretty good. The one thing I will say with all these vehicles here today, and it seems to be something that really affects the rally cars, is getting them off the line is a little bit complicated. Essentially, you just have to sort of boot them at the absolute last second. Otherwise, if you try to launch them with full throttle, the car will just drop revs immediately. Which is a little bit strange. You sort of have to spule the turbo up and keep the boost on when you're just about to launch it. Otherwise, you would just not go anywhere, which is a little bit strange. However, the WRX, yeah, a little bit of understeer, but probably the second quickest vehicle in a straight line here today. It might even be a little bit quicker than the Quattro, to be honest with you. Yeah, this was a great vehicle. All the Subaru Imprezas are very, very good cars, save for the understeer, and this one definitely is no exception to that rule. And finally today, we have a Mitsubishi Lancia Evo 9, 286 horsepower, 3,285 pounds of weight. Now, once again, we've had many Evos around before. And yeah, they are kind of similar to Subarus in the sense that they understeer a little bit, but they're relatively decent. The Evo 9 really was an exception because this is a fantastic handling car. Again, this is another one that really surprised me. It's not quite as good as the 037 Stradale, but it is close. This is just amazing to drive. The suspension is a bit wobbly here and there, but it isn't as bad as, say, the Quattro or the T16 or anything like that. Yeah, a little bit wobbly, but other than that, it's okay. This car's biggest issue, surprisingly enough, is straight line speed. Even with 286 horsepower, it's the third most powerful car here today. However, it's not that much quicker than T16. I think the 037 would probably beat this in a drag race. Yeah, it just was not particularly quick, which kind of surprised me, to be honest with you. I was expecting the Evo to be a lot quicker in a straight line. Through the follow-through, you can take this absolutely flat out. Once again, this is a beautiful to drive vehicle. It just does not have any straight line speed. And while sure, at Top Gear, having great handling is truly an awesome thing to have, you do need some straight line speed as well, because there is quite a few straights here, and the Evo, unfortunately, just could not cope with the straights, which is a little bit of a shame. Anyways, on to the times for today, and the 037 Stradale is the fastest car of the day, going into 144th with a 125.800. The Subaru WRX, however, is not too far behind with a 125.839, and the Audi Quattro goes into 150th with a 126.271. Good times all around from all those vehicles. The Subaru and the Lancia sort of go in between Evos and Imprezas of various generations, and the Quattro is a bit quicker than a Grand Cherokee Jeep, which is pretty good. Next up, the Evo 9 goes into 158th with a 127.206. Again, it's a bit of a shame that car. If it just had a bit more straight line speed, it could be well up there. It'd probably beat the Impreza, but as it stands, it's in between an IDX Nismo and a Lexus IS300. Moving down the board, the 205 T16 goes into 172nd with a 128.189, beating out a Ford Focus RS Mark 1, which is pretty damn decent when you consider how old that vehicle is compared to the Ford Focus. The the Celica GT4 goes into 183rd with a 129.185, beats out a GMC Cyclone and a Mazda MX-5, and our first ever tie happens with the Renault 5 Turbo, tying with the MX-5 from 2016 with a 129.374. So there you go, that was our slowest car of the day, the Renault 5 Turbo. Ultimately, these rally cars did actually surprise me. They're all pretty decent to drive despite some understeer issues from various cars. Anyways, friends, that is it for today's episode of the Forza Top Gear Laps. As always, if you have any themes or suggestions for cars you'd like to see go around the track, leave them down below in the comments section. Next week, not too sure what I'm going to be doing, but anyways, as always, make sure to vote down in the straw poll below for what car you'd like to see go around the Top Gear track tomorrow in the rally, the 70s rally showdown or whatever it sort of is on that straw poll. I have themes for them now, which is pretty cool. Anyways, friends, I want to thank you all very much for watching. My name has been The Real Emile, and until next time, farewell.